And NIO fam, happy Tuesday to you. It's Tuesday, September 30th, 2025. It's almost 4 p.m. Central Time as I'm recording this, and there's a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. First off, let's start with stock price, because I took the last couple of days off and actually enjoyed not doing a video and not talking about the NIO stock price. But I want to point out what happened on Monday, where the close for NIO stock was at $7.21. And that is a level that I had talked about on Friday. Of course, what happened on Friday, almost immediately after I dropped that video, was this, the NIO stock sell-off. And that caused me to share a few things. I talked about the previous video, I talked about the exchange volume, I talked about dark pool volume, I talked about max pain at $7, which is near where the stock price ended up trading on Friday. So that made me think, okay, I want to keep this on the radar for this week. Here is max pain for this week for the options expiring October 3rd, 2025. Max pain is $7. So let's see what happens throughout the course of the week. But if we come back and kind of hone in on what we saw today, this candle caught my attention during the day because the high on this was $7.78. Of course, if we look at the reversal, which I'm calling from the start of around July 10th or 11th, right in there, stock price was roughly $3.50 and has, obviously moved up to close to $8. And so I'm just wondering if we get a day with big volume, which, by the way, volume today did not quite get to 100 million shares traded during the day, if we will end up seeing NIO stock make another one of these bigger moves, if we get a few days of volume with 100 million share trade volume or more back to back to back. That's how we've seen NIO stock move up through the last sort of key levels that I was watching. So let's see what happens throughout the course of the week. Also, as I mentioned, I'm going to keep in the back of my mind that max pain price, at about $7. And so we'll see what happens throughout the course of the week. Tomorrow, within the next 24 hours, frankly, we're going to get the September data from NIO on the monthly delivery numbers, and then we'll also see where they are with respect to the quarter 3 guidance. I'm really curious about that. But I want to pull this up because we also got some failed to FTD data, today. And so I wanted to offer that. And those are depicted by the white lines. This is the whole history of NIO stock. And 2 things that I'd like to do. First, I'm going to remove price. So you can see there's really only been kind of one window where NIO stock is traded in the US and the FTDs really dropped off. And basically, the stock price was between $35 and almost $70 during that time frame. So you had a lot of the FTDs pop back up. And if you'll notice, even more recently, even with this reversal trend that we're in, now we're starting to get some of the FTD data, and it is still showing as elevated. So what gets really interesting is when I now reinsert price and we go back, and I had done the video, I'll link it if you haven't seen it, where I did kind of a comparison and a breakdown looking back at the 6-month window where NIO stock made a move from $3.40 to over $55. That was in less than 6 months. But a couple of things happened. One is we had 100 million share trade volume or more on about 75 of those days. So a lot of days with that bigger volume. And then also we had the drop off of the FTDs. We have not seen the drop off of the FTDs yet. So that is something that I'm keeping in mind, along with things like, yes, now the max pain is going to be, at least on my radar. I don't know that I'll track it every week, but we'll see if, anything changes this week by the end of the week with stock price, especially after delivery numbers and that sort of thing. So a lot really going on. And then this as well, I figured I'd pull this up. I hadn't pulled it up for a while. This is the NIO Reddit mentions, and I'm now going to zoom out because if you'll notice, it looks like there are a decent number until you start going back and looking at the bigger picture. And then you realize, and this is one of the gauges that I have for sentiment on the retail side, I think once we start seeing this kind of interest on the retail side, that's when we're going to be near a full sentiment shift. We're nowhere near it, as you can see on the right-hand side. We're nowhere near that at this point. So that's the retail side of it. And then as far as the big money goes, the institutional investors, kind of simple view here. I remember when NIO stock did make that meteoric rise in those moves to the $55+ range. And what we saw during that time was all of the analysts had to chase the stock price up And so they were changing all of their numbers up. Right now, they're still leading the NIO stock price. They're still ahead of where the NIO stock price is. So I think we've got a long way to go on the sentiment shift side of things. Just easy indicators that I'm using that I want to keep sort of sharing and keeping folks aware of. How about this? This is the insurance registration data. This is a new record for NIO, actually. 10,800 is 100 more than the best week they had ever done. I'm pretty happy with the numbers. And in fact, I did a video. It was the last video I did. And I talked about if NIO was going to see, let's see, an 8,000, or excuse me, an 11,000. I don't even know why I said 8,000, an 11,000 or more number for this week. And I even came up with kind of a breakdown of what we might see from the different sub brands. So let's do a little comparison and see just how epic of a failure, or maybe it wasn't a failure and I didn't do too badly with this. So first off, we've got the NIO numbers. Obviously, the NIO ES8 numbers are helping the brand. So over 5,000, 5.2 thousand roughly for just the NIO brand. And what had I said here? I said the NIO without the ES8, maybe 2.5 to maybe $3,000 or 3,000, excuse me. And so then with the ES8, I said maybe 5,000, and we got 5.2. So we'll call that a win. That's good. Let's come back and look at Firefly now. Firefly, I was running the numbers and I wasn't sure, but I thought we would see at least 1,500. And they did come in with 1,800. So how did I present that here? Looks like for Firefly, I said, oh, about 2,000. So maybe that's the 200 differential there between the NIO brand and Firefly. And that's kind of that difference. And then let's see about Onvo. The nice surprise from Onvo was that they ended up with 3,800 total. And here is the breakdown between the two models. The 2,600 was consistent with about where I thought the Onvo L90 would be, maybe to the low side, because I wasn't sure about the Onvo L60. Those numbers came up compared to the rest of the month. And so that was very positive, I thought. And how did I do if we look back here? Onvo, the L60 and the L90, I said 3,000, maybe 3.5 between the two of them. And so we got 3,800 between the two of them. So I personally am happy with the numbers, although I am curious what we're going to see from NIO with the monthly numbers, which I'll be able to pull, and we'll talk about that after we get that data. We'll do that from the NIO site. It's just, look, it's fun to track this stuff. Also, and an asterisk, these insurance registration numbers, these don't come from NIO. And also there is, I believe, a 3-day potential, essentially when the car can be delivered to where insurance can be registered. Let's say government offices are closed. What I believe is allowed throughout the country is for 3 business or work days after delivery where the insurance registration has to be filed. So that's also why we're not going to see exact numbers, which is why I prefer to defer to NIO whenever we can. But anyway, I wanted to share that and offer it, as well as this. For those who don't realize that NIO, with its tech advancements and with its AI play, is going to have more flexibility, especially with the pricing and the battery as a service within China, especially. And they're not going to need to get into the full-on price wars the way that everyone else does. They have this early mover advantage with battery as a service and what that allows them to do. And because they've built up, and what folks used to call cash burn, I always sort of thought it was investing myself, but they did all this development of all this technology and everything that they have, from the Sky OS to now their own chip to positioning with the battery as a service, and then also the power swap stations, which really just gives them several layers of advantages at this point. And that's why I've said for a while that I think they're in the best position for the long term. And now we're starting to see the numbers catch up. Factory 3 online. We got our first kind of teaser for that with the data next week. By the way, I will not be, I'll track the data, but I'm not going to be as interested as the first full week in October, because the best first full week NIO's ever had on the insurance registration side of things is 6,300. And I'm curious what we'll see in that first full week of October. But my voice is starting to go, and I've gone on longer than 8 minutes. So let me get this thing up and out. I'll create chapters or timestamps and That'll make it easier for you to navigate at your convenience, jump around. And then it's also convenient for me if I want to reference back to these videos and have those kind of lined up and queued up. So in any event, thanks for sticking around to the end. I'll see y'all again very soon.